name is Julia Trubikhina, and I'm a professor at in the Department of Classics in the Russian program. I've been teaching in Kharkiv for a number of years. I think, if I'm not mistaken, from 2009. And I teach regularly heritage classes. That means that I teach language classes to the students who come from Russian speaking families. Russian might not be the only language, especially now as the demographic changes and the kind of heritage students that we get change also. We get a lot more students whose parents come from Central Asia, for example, but Russian is still spoken in the families, along with, say, Uzbeki or Farsi or something else. And they're all different levels. That creates a challenge because you have sort of a little bit like a village classroom where students are of different levels. I also teach the majority of heritage literature classes. The classes that I normally teach are seminars, advanced seminars for Russian majors mostly, or those who plan to do a Russian major, in Russian poetry, 18th century, 19th century, and the 20th century, 2 different seminars. I used to teach, and sometimes do teach, Russian story, Russian short story. I used to teach Russian culture after the revolution. And I teach some of the comparative literature classes. For example, next spring I will be teaching Vladimir Nabokov. That will be in English. That will be for any number of students, any kind of students. And I teach vampire classes, which is cross-listed with comparative literature department. It's a lot of television, a lot of film, some folklore, a little bit. The Russian element in this class exists, but is getting smaller because the text students read shorter texts. Vampires is our biggest enrollment booster, for obvious reasons. I don't have illusions that it's because I'm so interesting. It's because students like vampires. It's very normal not to know what you want to do when you're young. But I come from the system where you were supposed to know what you want to study when you are right out of high school. The Russian system, just like the European system, and my system was not even Russian, Soviet when I went to college in Moscow State University. You chose specifically the department to which you applied, where you knew what you will be studying. I wanted to study languages and literature, and in my past life, very long time ago, I studied Spanish language and Spanish literature and worked as a Spanish interpreter and translator professionally. So my languages were Romance languages, French, Italian. Italian I completely forgot, but I can operate when I travel. And of course English. I really wanted to continue to go to graduate school, but when I graduated, that was a very beginning of a very turbulent era in still the Soviet Union and then Russia. So very many things changed. As they say, you can't go home again, back home again, right? You can't go because there is no country that I came from. So at some point in the early 90s, I was probably the second year when it became possible to apply from still the Soviet Union, to apply for graduate school in the United States. So I studied the question. It was very different environment. I had to, there was only one place in Moscow where you could get the information. It's not like this. There was no internet, obviously, also. And I applied to comparative literature programs. And I came to study, to do master's degree and then then PhD in comparative literature at NYU. My primary interest is translation and history, philosophy, and practice of translation. I'm also a translator, literary translator, among other things. Translated many different things. And I also sort of a Nabokovian. I am a Nabokov scholar, Vladimir Nabokov. My book is on Nabokov. I guess somehow translation in Nabokov took me closer to the Slavic field, and I completely departed from Spanish, left it behind. When you start researching something new, you come with one set of assumptions, and you often, in the process of research, it changes and you get very different. Same with project. You think you're working on one project, but then it evolves. It happens with me often. It's happening to me right now, as a matter of fact. Next week is the biggest conference of the year in Slavic. We're all going, I assume. At least I'm planning to see all my colleagues there. And I'm feverishly finishing the paper. And when I started working on the paper for the conference, I started working on a very different paper about translation, as I'm working on anti-war poetry translation. So I started out with one set of what I was thinking, even the text that I was going to translate. But then it's sort of, the project corrects itself, right? It shows, for example, in translation, it shows that you might love the text in Russian, but this is not a text that renders itself in a really interesting way to translation. But the other text will work in English better. I love translating contemporary stuff because very often the most interesting is working with authors who are alive, with whom you either know them, right, or you can actually correspond with them. And contemporary poetry is difficult and different from 19th century, say, romantic authors. And sometimes it's impenetrable or seems impenetrable. Sometimes you just don't understand. So it's interesting to be able to correspond with actual author. But I did a lot of translations of contemporary American poets, but I also translate both ways. So I translate from Russian into English and from English into Russian. But it's very difficult. And some things were better than others. It always happens like this. Something works, something doesn't. Something you have to rhyme. For example, epigrams. They have to be funny. And the fun is the rhyme, but you can't make the same fun. You have to make contingent and somehow different. Sometimes you invent a different thing. And that's the beauty of translation. You have to have a joke. Epigram is a joke. And very often a joke is in a rhyme. The rhyme itself is funny. You can't create prose vers libre, right? Like free verse, because that will be a crib and nobody will laugh. It has to be funny. That was a very fun thing to work on and time-consuming and great. Also, syntactically and grammatically, something doesn't work in English, right? I have a collaborate on many translators and a close friend who is American, so it helps, you know. She, for example, checks my prosody, because even the meter in regular verse, like 19th century verse, works iambic or trochaic, works very differently in Russian and in English. And I'm always prone to either adding a syllable or missing a syllable because I think Russian. So I use her to check my prosody. I'm translating an anti-war poem by a very interesting woman poet. And in it, the image of a pre-war Moscow, not even pre-war, it's like the 80s, right? When the big oil boom, Putin lived off oil. And the expression that she uses, because the whole poem is built sort of based on the imagery of horrible comestibles. So everything is some kind of horrifying food. And so the image of Moscow is rolling in black butter or oil. Oil would be too clear. Black oil is oil, right? But the word in Russian is the same for butter and oil. And an expression that she's drawing, she's recoding, is to roll like cheese in butter. The Russian expression is like a little bit equivalent to live like hog and clover. There is an American English expression, to be like a hog and clover, meaning live really well without, in abundance, not thinking that you cannot afford something. Hog and clover is an exception, is an expression. In Russian, it's to roll like cheese in butter. And here it's recoded as Moscow was rolling in black, and one word, butter and oil. What to do? There's no such expression in English. Even you are looking puzzled even about hog and clover, right? So this is an example of literary translation problems, because the whole thing, you have to keep the principle of recoding the idioms in a horrifying way, and also keeping it within the framework of horrifying comestibles, because Moscow is cannibalistic. Yeah, I haven't. We're thinking of hog and clover, but it's not as good. Maybe I will just let this one fly and have some kind of black butter, and people will not know the idiom, but it's a good image, rolling in black oil or in black butter. So you always choose. You lose something, you gain something.